We are set to reconvene. This meeting is now back in session. The next item on our agenda is 3A, community opportunity for comment and the acknowledgement of public requests to speak. I will read the disclaimer. Pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, this agenda item provides an open call to the public, allowing individuals to address the governing board on any issue within the jurisdiction of the board. Items not listed on the agenda may be brought to the governing board's attention under this section of the agenda. Due to the Arizona open meeting law, the governing board cannot discuss or take any action on items not listed on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, response to public comment about matters not appearing on the agenda will be limited to individual board members who may ask staff to study the matter, respond to any criticism, or ask that the matter be put on a future agenda for further consideration and decision at a later date. Please limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes, and no more than 30 minutes will be devoted to the public comment portion of the agenda. When you approach the podium, please state your name for the record. Our first public participation participant for the evening is Allison Thompson.
Good evening. My name is Allison Thompson, and I am here today to show my support to the LASD community, the teachers, transportation, admins, and a few of the governing board members who are doing an amazing job. You can't talk to people or see the news without knowing there's been a lot of unnecessary criticism and negative information spreading about the district, which I feel is unfair and untrue from my experience. The experience that gives me insight into what is happening and what our kids are learning in the classroom comes from having 3 kids who have been enrolled in LASD for a total of 11 years. All of my children have started in kindergarten, and I've added that up, and we have spent 23 grade years at LASD. I've helped with a lot of homework. I've seen a lot of report cards. I've volunteered numerous hours both in and out of the classroom and recycled stacks and stacks of my kids' completed math and reading worksheets. It makes me very angry to see rhetoric from people about going back to the basics, which insinuates our kids are not learning math and reading. I still have yet to learn what it is that my kids are learning that are not these basics. I asked my kids, they don't know either. I could stand up here for hours talking about the support and learning that my kids have received from LASD, but I'll only share 2 recent examples. My daughter struggled with math during the COVID year and made some improvement last year, but wasn't at grade level. This year, her teacher has her and a few other students coming in as soon as the school opens in the morning for tutoring. This teacher is tutoring kids an extra 2 hours a week. When my daughter's test scores have obviously started to improve, her teacher is taking the extra time on Saturdays to email me while she's grading papers to let me know that my daughter is now getting A's on all of her math tests. This shows me that the basics are a priority and kids are being supported in their learning. COVID was hard on kids, so please be supportive, be concerned, but give these kids a chance to readjust before throwing blame at the district. Scores will improve. My next example is about my son, who is a sophomore at Millennium now. He spent his kinder through 8th grade at LASD. He took the pre-ACT last year, and he scored in the top 4% of kids in the nation, not just Arizona, the nation. Apparently, top 4 in the nation is what you can get from an LASD education. My observation over 11 years is that my kids are being taught in a way that they are continuing to excel as they progress through their education. LASD is not perfect and has challenges. However, most importantly, I feel the decisions that have been made by the board and the district have always been with the betterment of the students in mind. So thank you from me and all the other busy parents whose kids are missing stuff tonight, so I could be here to say this, and all the supporters and all the educators for making this a fantastic place for send our kids to school. And for those who don't agree, please educate yourself, please volunteer, and lift this district up rather than dragging it down.
Our next public participant is Deborah Boehm.
Deborah Bain, resident in Goodyear in the Litchfield School District. I have no children in the school right now because I'm a grandparent. However, I have strong feelings about the education system here in Litchfield, as I was a previous educator for 25 years and a principal for many years as well. Please note that the school board has not been amenable or responsive to the parents. A lot of parents have left because of that. Instead, the board has implemented programs to which the parents are diametrically opposed. You consented to oppose the will of those who elected you to office and to whom you swore an oath as the trustees of your position. Please note that the parents whose children you swore to protect now state that you have violated trust and have sought to harm their children. This is negligence and unacceptable behavior. Please note the oath that you swore upon your installation to office. The oath is binding. Note that the oath of office commands you as a servant and indentured servant to protect the people's constitutional rights, which are the supreme law of the land. Please note that I remind the board that your only power is derived from the people. You swore an oath to protect and maintain the constitutional rights of the people, including my right as a resident to dictate what will be allowed and included in the instruction in the schools, to stand with others and insist that the board refocus on the students and their academic success, which is, after all, the purpose of Arizona education. I state that this includes the rights of the children. No unlawful implementation of curriculum inconsistent with the good order, peace, morality, or safety of the state or with the rights of others may be allowed by the school board. We are quite aware from many meetings that this has been implemented. And I was quite interested to see that conscious discipline is considered a character education, which it is not. There have been attempts to interfere with parent-child relationships. The disciplinary system supports racism, less significant consequences for various ethnic groups, and soft consequences that lack impetus for change in behavior. All of these problems have persisted and have not changed in the last year and a half. I would like to see the district board make some decisions that actually make a difference.
Our next public participant is Mike Finnegan.
My name is Mike Finnegan. Dear voters, as a concerned community taxpayer, I have spent the last 1.5 years attending the Litchfield Elementary School District school board meetings and trying to better understand the school district. This is what I've learned, and these are the facts. The public school system is in serious trouble, and its leadership is failing the students. For the past 7 years, the cumulative English and math academic performance of 4,700 LASD students is not proficient. Tragic. Kim Moran, since 2017, and Superintendent Gunning for the past 25 years, do not know how to fix it. Nothing they have tried has worked during their time in these past 7 years. The strategic plan goals, which they created in 2019, are fluff and indicate a ship adrift without measurable direction. Moran identified with and sought to implement the radical Marxist ideology of Ibram X. Kendi's critical race theory within LASD. Moran, like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, shocked parents with the secret transformational equity plan, which incited board meetings and required armed policemen in attendance, like tonight. She has repeatedly violated open meeting laws and resided over the resignation of a frustrated Dr. Armstead after only 5 months on the board. LASD leadership needs to be held accountable and changed for positive improvements to take place. The LASD school district maintains an annual $84 million budget. LASD currently maintains a $16 million rainy day fund, carryover money that hasn't been spent in past years, and they blackmail parents with override program eliminations. The district has been addicted to 30 years of continuous ballot box budgeting overrides. The current override request is for 10.4 million. 58% of our property taxes fund public education. Since 2020, LASD has received $11 million in ESSER funding for 3 years. As a school district, they hired outside math teachers for the next 2 years to teach math. Think about that. For the past 7 years, 4,700 LASD students are not proficient in math and English. A 2022 consultant override ballot survey paid for by the LASD asked this question: public schools in our district are heading in the right direction, and 55% disagreed. More money for the public school system is not the answer at this time. Vote for a needed change in leadership and demand rising academic performance for your
Our
hard-earned
next
taxpayer
public
dollars.
participant is Katie Hill.
Good evening. My name is Katie Hill, and first, I don't know about you, but I need to take a breath because I don't know how you sit up here every night and listen to that. It's very hard for me as an audience member. So I came here tonight because I wanted to take my personal time to thank Kimberly Moran for her continued support of the Litchfield Elementary School District. As a staff member of this district, I've experienced her involvement long before her position on this board. First, as a member of an organization advocating for bonds and overrides, she would come and speak. She would come and speak about tax credits, which that got me donating. I don't do the monthly, but we donate the whole check. And then as a PTSA member when her students joined Litchfield Elementary School. Since Mrs. Moran joined this board, she has been direct, goal-focused, and supportive of both our staff and students. Not everybody agrees with her, but that's okay because her passion and her respect for staff has made it to where even with those differences, we come to an agreement. Earlier tonight, Mrs. Moran said, when we know better, we do better. We live by that at this school, and I'm sure at every school in this district. She has owned her infractions from the past. She knows what she did that night wasn't okay, but might have done the same thing. I'm sorry, like when all of this comes to blow. So it's truly time to move on from it. It was also said earlier tonight that if a program or position is funded by the override and that override is at jeopardy, that we should blame her. Well, I can tell you as a reading specialist married to a PE teacher whose entire family income relies on that override passing, I still wholeheartedly support Kimberly Moran for the Litchfield Elementary School District. Thank you.
Our next public participant is Julie Osmondson.
Julie Osmondson. Dear School Board, I'm speaking tonight to ask that you revise your current kindergarten enrollment policy as to stop discriminating against intellectually advanced children of employees. Your current policy states children who reach the age of 5 between September 1st and December 31st of the school year are eligible for early entrance if they meet the district requirements. Each child will be assessed by one of our teachers to determine their maturity level and readiness for learning. If district officials determine that early kindergarten is in the best interest of the child, they will be accepted into a kindergarten class. Unfortunately, you're unfairly discriminating against district employees who have advanced kindergarten students, since your policy does not apply to them. My son attended full-day preschool at Belen Soto Elementary School for the entire 21-22 school year. He met and exceeded all standards taught. If the purpose of your full-day preschool program, which employee children are given priority access to, is to prepare students for kindergarten, Why then are you unfairly discriminating against these same students who are intellectually advanced with a birthday between September 1st and December 31st by not allowing them an equal opportunity to be screened and to continue their education for an entire school year? With the birthday of October 5th, I don't feel that my son or other employee children should be punished for being smart. Unfortunately, since I live in the Pendergast boundaries, I was not allowed per LESD policy to test him into kindergarten early in the district I work in. He was welcomed into the Pendergast district's full-day kindergarten program after his initial screening to evaluate his readiness. He is exceeding state kindergarten standards and is showing that he is already above average when compared to kindergarten students nationally and has already earned a Student of the Month award. Yet he is still discriminated against in the district as the child of an employee, even though district employees are given priority enrollment status in all other grade levels, including preschool. Your policy, which I'm also asking that you revise, states if you opt to enroll your child in kindergarten in another school and then want to return to our district, they will be placed in a kindergarten classroom to be evaluated. School officials will then determine during the first few weeks if they are ready to be moved to first grade. So even as a first grader next school year who has met all kindergarten standards and is above average, you are continuing to discriminate against intellectually advanced students by requiring them to go back a grade and miss several weeks of grade level instruction in order to conform to your outdated policy. This policy only encourages advanced students to go to different charter schools and districts where they will be given equal access to education and will be challenged and advanced accordingly. I am asking you tonight to make revising this policy a priority before the end of the calendar year so that all children will be welcomed and educated in this district.
That is the conclusion of the community opportunity for comment. We will now move on to agenda item 4, which is our consent agenda. I will begin by asking any board members if they have items they would like to remove from the agenda. Board Member Clymer. The consent agenda, let me clarify.
Yes, I do have a comment on one, but the item I would like to remove or to have for discussion is item 5W.
Thank you. Board Member Zeidema.
Nothing to remove.
Board Member Dowling.
The same item, 5W.
5W. Okay, my understanding is that Board Member Honak has dropped from our meeting and we have made repeated attempts to reach out to him and have asked him to rejoin. My understanding is he has not rejoined as of this time. Is that correct? So we will proceed without him. I also would like for item 5W to be removed from the consent agenda. I will now ask if any board members have any questions or comments on items not removed from the consent agenda. Board Member Clymer.
Yes, I had a question that I submitted earlier, but I just wanted to reiterate just for everyone that's listening and maybe other board members that didn't have a chance to read the attachments that were given. Excuse me, it is 5M, the request to increase the certified tutoring stipend for our before and after school tutoring programs and our homebound teacher stipend. So I had just wanted to ask some questions about, I don't have any issue with increasing the stipends, but just wondering the reason behind that, why sort of midstream were we doing that? And I, instead of answering, Jody, I'll let you give the chance, but I just wanted to understand this has been shown, at least from the short time last year and with summer school and then moving into this year, one of the programs that seems to be making a considerable difference. So I think it's important to continue it. And I was just asking, what are our staffing challenges right now? And is this one of the ways that we're trying to increase staffing and close some of those gaps?
Correct. We are having some staffing challenges. And so we thought that the possibility of increasing the compensation would encourage more staff members to participate. In comparison, last spring, we had 451 students that participated in tutoring. And currently at this time, we only have 177 across the district. So we had a pretty dramatic drop. So we wanted to see if increasing the compensation would encourage more people to participate.
And is that program open to other certified teachers that might not currently be employees at Litchfield, or is it only employees at Litchfield that can take those jobs?
It's only employees at Litchfield that can
Okay.
take those jobs.
Thank you. My other last comment just about the consent agenda in general is I wanted to say a huge thank you to our friendly facilities director, Dan Ensign, for his hard work at the school facilities board. As you can see, there are a handful of amazing consent agenda items here for what I would assume are badly needed updates and maintenances to our schools. So thank you for your hard work. It is not easy to do. And I will say for everyone out there watching, when we go to conferences or other things where people learn where we are from, they are jealous that they do not have Director Ensign on their staff because we get such accolades from the school facilities board. So thank you for your hard work. It does not go unnoticed. That's all I had on the agenda. Consent agenda.
Board Member Zeidema, do you have any questions on the consent agenda?
I didn't have any questions, but I did want to say thank you so much to the Arizona Department of Education for the several times now where they have been giving money to our teachers through Donors Choose, and we've been able to have several projects funded. This is the second round, I think, where that has happened, and it was thousands of dollars and tons of projects in our classroom. And so I always share that information out with all of my teacher friends whenever it comes up saying, hey, do this because it's basically free money for your classroom. So go, there's got to be some project you want to get done. So I'm just glad that teachers are taking advantage of that and we're being able to get a lot of these extra resources into their classrooms.
Dr. Dowling, do you have any questions on the consent agenda items?
Just as we previously discussed, just 5W.
Okay, great. I would just like to reiterate the comments that Board Member Clymer and Board Member Zeidema made, and I'm going to throw some numbers out there to correspond. So I would like to acknowledge the consent agenda item 5D, gifts, grants, and bequests. We received over $80,000 this month in donations, which is pretty amazing. And I would also like to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of Director Ensign. He has helped to facilitate from the School Facilities Board about $110,000 towards our much needed repairs that don't have to come from our own budget when we can get the School Facilities Board to help to fund that. So much appreciated there. With that, I will move to approve the consent agenda minus item 5W as presented.
I second.
Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We will now move to address item 4B, address the item removed from the consent agenda, which is item 5W, out-of-state travel request to attend Teacher-Powered Schools Conference in Minneapolis, Minnesota, November 4th through the 6th, 2022. Since Board Member Clymer was the first to mention this item, I will open the floor to her for questions and comments.
Thank you. I previously submitted some questions, but I'll go through them here. I'm interested first and foremost of the funding. It seems like maybe there's some grant dollars or something there that is impressive and not always offered to us. So I'd like to know more information about that. But I also have a concern about not necessarily the travel, although it is very short notice and trying to find proper coverage for that many employees. It does bring me pause, at least just in this situation where we have such difficulty with getting substitutes. But more importantly, I know we've talked as a board and administration about trying to limit the new programs and new initiatives and things like that coming down. So I just want to hear a little bit more about this and what the kind of the reasoning behind wanting to do this right now. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Board Member Clymer, for those questions. We have an opportunity to work alongside Superintendent Watson and the Office of Maricopa County School Superintendent team on something that they have been working with for years. It's called Teacher-Powered Schools, and it is the strategy is to reduce or to maintain teacher retention and to retain and attract teachers. So they started looking and talking to some of the principals that earned the Superintendent Watson's Principal of the Year award. And what they realized was that there's so many incredible programs in those schools, and how do we maintain those, and how do we involve those incredible leaders into learning about how to empower teachers and how to find ways to collaborate together. And so they started bringing that team together, one of them being our own principal, Luke Jenke. And so that is how we initially got involved with Superintendent Watson's office. And they had this cohort that they're moving forward with on teacher-powered schools. And basically, it is not a program, it is not a curriculum, it is a framework that they have evidence to show that it has increased teacher retention and achievement in many schools around the nation by creating frameworks to give teachers a voice in their professional development opportunities, into the ways they are being evaluated, into the way they are providing students voices. And so we started learning about it just to see, okay, it piqued our interest because we do have incredible schools and a lot of programs in place. But if there's something innovative to use to really focus on the teacher retention, then we needed to learn more. So we started to attend meetings with Superintendent Watson's team. And Luke, we invited Verrado Middle School as well. One of the reasons is that Verrado L is a feeder to Verrado Middle School. So we thought a team partnership and just learning more about this and the proximity that those schools have to each other to allow their teachers to begin collaborating. And what Superintendent Watson's office then offered us is that they have ESSER dollars through ADE. And the reason this is quick is because they recently received these dollars from ADE. So it was a quick turnaround that they will be able to pay to have teams go through this cohort and to learn more. And so from now until December, it is an exploration phase where the teams are just learning and taking in the information to see if it's something they want to continue on. If those two teams determine that it is something that they feel that their schools would benefit from in regards to teacher retention and student achievement, then they would move on to the planning phase, which is January through May. All this is guided by Superintendent Watson's team and different schools around the area, districts around the area that are involved in this. And then from there, it will move into next year of implementation. So what we see thus far, although we're just in the beginning of learning, is that it's not in addition. It's a way to use some innovative strategies to restructure the way we empower and give voice to our teachers and children. So that is what we're moving towards, and that's why we've requested that these two teams be allowed to go to this conference to learn more. And they'll actually be touring schools in the Minneapolis area to learn more and see it firsthand and to talk to teachers about it. There are 5 teachers that will need subs because the other teachers are either behavior coaches or advisors or instructional coaches or leaders. And when I asked Principal Jenke and Principal Paduano if this is approved, if they felt concerned about their filling those positions for the sub days on that Thursday and Friday, neither one of them felt that would be a struggle because they've had good fill rates in the past.
Thank you. Dr. Dowling, do you have additional questions on this item?
Good job, good job. Two schools are impacted by this. Are they going to, how are we going to measure? So they go there, well, they come back, so what? What
And we will learn from Superintendent Watson's team on how we would measure our progress from the beginning to the end in this implementation. But what we're also hoping is that they come back and share with their colleagues, their other principal leaders, and along the way of how they're restructuring and be training some of our principals in that. Because Superintendent Watson's office is also going, probably, most likely, offer the next cohort that maybe a couple of our other principals would be able to join on as well.
How many more cohorts or do they anticipate having in the
They
future?
haven't said. They talked about next year, starting a cohort when this one's over, but they never said how many down the road. So we're hoping that we learn a lot this year that we'll be able to translate back to our other principals and engage them even throughout this year and watching different things that our Principal Paduano and Principal Jenke are doing, and then hopes to inspire some of them to want to move forward. But we don't have any solid numbers as to how many cohorts they'll have or how many of us will be invited to be able to participate.
My question is, I understand that there'll be some school tours that will be conducted when you are potentially in Minneapolis. Do we know of any of our peer districts or surrounding districts here that have already implemented this program? This is the first I've heard of the program, which is why I think for myself, why I pulled it off the agenda, because we have there are a lot of ideas out there, and part of my job is to make sure that what we're spending our time and resources on, even though this is not a huge outlay of our money, there is some outlay and some cost associated with this. I just want to know more about, I guess, maybe the research side of it, who's using it, what's been shown, and make sure that this is, the best use of this time and resource.
Absolutely. They presented to us in a map, little dots on a map in Arizona of all the schools that are currently teacher-powered schools. And I'm going to make a guesstimate that there is approximately 20 right now. I'll send you that information in a Friday update so you can see all that. But directly around us, I don't recall any. I do remember that there is, I believe it was Kyrene was in this cohort, and there was another one, but mostly the schools that we saw or heard from were in the East Valley and then other states as well. At the meeting we went down to Superintendent Watson's school, Hope Academy, and that was where we had one of our meetings, and we were able to hear from school leaders in other states around the nation about what they're doing. And then Hope Academy actually uses teacher-powered school strategies. I believe they said they're in year 3, but I could be wrong on that. And their principal stood up and talked through what they have, the data that they have received in regards to retention and achievement. Those are the 2 pieces of data that they were showing us from different districts in our nation. And those were 2 huge things that we know with our strategic plan that we are obviously always striving for. So.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a great program that I'm glad we have the opportunity to look into with minimal cost to us as a district, and always happy to partner with Superintendent Watson and do what we can on his recommendations. Any other questions on this item?
No questions, but I will move to approve item 5W, out-of-state travel request to attend the conference in Minneapolis.
I second.
Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We will now move on to our agenda section, action discussion agenda items. The first item on that section, I should say, is item 6A, approval of school year calendar for 2023-2024. And this will be presented by Executive Director DeCoste.
Thank you. There are no changes since it was presented last month. There was one question from Dr. Dowling, and I submitted the survey to you guys on a Friday update. And it's also, I think, included under the administrative section of your notes on board docs. So if you have any questions or any changes, I would just ask that you would approve the 23-24 calendar.
If there are no questions, I will move to approve the school year calendar for 2023-2024 as presented.
I second.
Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next agenda item is 6B, discussion and possible approval of board resolution in support of immediate special session of the legislature to override the aggregate expenditure limit. This will be presented by Superintendent Gunning.
Madam President, members of the governing board, as you have been aware, over the last several years, we've had to reach out to our legislatures to extend the aggregate expenditure limit. This year, we were awarded additional funding, and that could definitely be in jeopardy. The cut for our school district alone would be about approximately 13.9 million. We would encourage the board to consider this resolution.
Are there any board member questions on this resolution?
I have no questions, but later in my board report, I went to a finance training yesterday, and one of the things that they definitely talked about was the aggregate expenditure limit and how you could see where it was going to be. But basically, we're going to have to cut like 20% of our budget as of April 1st, the end of the school year for this year. There won't even be that much, like we're supposed to cut 20% or 25% of our budget out, and we don't even have that much time of school left. So that is a huge amount of money. And I think that we all agree we don't want to look at cutting $13 million out of our budget the last 2 months of school. So I 100% support us doing this, and us as board members being pretty vocal about it ourselves in any way that we can, that this needs to happen, and it needs to happen now.
I agree with board member Zaidama. Earlier this evening, the topic of board member advocacy came up, and I think this is a perfect example of what we can do as a board to advocate for our students and our staff to our state legislators. If there are no other comments or questions, I will entertain a motion.
I motion that we, let's see, I apologize, approve the resolution to support immediate special session of the legislature to override the aggregate expenditure limit as presented.
I second.
Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. Our last item in this section is item 6C, approval of evaluation instrument, Deputy Superintendent of Academic Success. This will be presented by Dr. Duzey and Superintendent Gunning.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the governing board. We have a unique opportunity at this time by adding the position of Deputy Superintendent to also look at an evaluation instrument. As we were going through the process, we wanted to look at options and opportunities that we may possibly have that could actually be utilized from the top all the way down into our teachers and instructional staff. So tonight we are looking at the instrument of Marzano's district leadership model. This is aligned to our strategic plan under student success by empowering all of our students to reach the highest potential. Of course, our people, the work environment, and feel connected and valued. Service, provide quality service, both internally and externally, and finance and resources, optimizing student success by evaluating and continually improving the effectiveness and efficiency of all of our resources.
Madam President and Governing Board, our community and staff, I'm Dr. Duzey, and I'd like to take this opportunity and just provide an explanation of how this instrument, which is the Marzano District Leader Instrument, not only aligns to our strategic plan, but also the roles and goals and responsibilities of the Deputy Superintendent of Academic Success position that was created by the board in collaboration with the Superintendent's Office. And I've provided this visual here for you. As you can can see on the top, we have our strategic plan, which is student success, our goals, people, service, finances, and resource. On the side, I've aligned it to also the roles and responsibilities of the Deputy Superintendent of Academic Success position. The first role that was identified in this new position for LSD was student achievement. The second goal, role and goal. Sorry, it's not moving. There we go. It's curriculum. The third, professional development. And the fourth and final, assessment. So if we go back, the reason why I wanted to highlight these things in purple is to show you the alignment between that responsibility as well as the goals of the district and the domains of the Marzano district leader model. As you can see, each domain aligns to the roles and responsibilities as well as the goals set forth in our strategic plan. And I'll review a little bit later in my presentation. I'll explain to you what each of those domains are, but you can see the alignment of domain 1, 5, and 6 of the Marzano district leader instrument aligns to student achievement. Curriculum, we have domain 3, 4, 6, and 5. Professional development, the domains are also aligned in here, domains 2, 3, 5, and 6. And then lastly, assessment, which is a responsibility of the deputy superintendent role, which incorporates domain 1, 2, and 6 of the Marzano district leader instrument.
Is this recommendation what is best for kids? Research indicates that there are several district leader actions and behaviors that significantly relate to student achievement. These actions and behaviors have been captured by Marzano and his research. Taken together with the effective district leader instrument, will have both a direct and indirect positive impact on student achievement. In this slide, you can see how through his research, the impact that leaders actually have on, thank you, on student achievement. And as you can tell, if you can develop and grow your leaders into the excellent category, they have a 17% gain in student achievement. The financial impact of the instrument is approximately $3,699. That cost includes training on the instrument, also access because it has an online component to it. And within that, the tool is accessed online and all of the data and information is retained in that format. But also there are a library of resources to help support and grow your leaders as impacted by the instructional instrument. Who is impacted? The superintendent and the deputy. Also, as we begin to look at different opportunities for our evaluation systems, potentially this could then impact, of course, all of our principals, executive directors, department leads, and of course, anyone working directly under the deputy as she's improving and growing and having potentially an instrument that can provide sound feedback. Indirectly, it's affecting 644 certified staff, as well as our over 10,600 students. The purpose of the request is to seek governing approval to pilot the model with our deputy superintendent this year, Dr. Doozy. Marzano used meta-analysis and examining research from 1978 to 2001. So it is a research-based evaluation tool. And these 21 specific actions are what has been used to develop Marzano's district leader and school leader evaluation model. We have actually even done training previously, not necessarily in the instructional or in the evaluation tool, but on his 21 components of strong leadership with our leaders prior to the pandemic. So it aligns well. Also, it requires that the position has opportunity for growth and provides that research-based focus, very specific feedback that aligns directly to our strategic plan and the role of the position. Again, it'll help us in this process as we're beginning to also research for our teacher evaluation tool to see and pilot if this seems like a resource that would be beneficial in that arena as well. And also being able to look at that cascading effect. So from the highest levels all the way down to our principals to then our teachers. So trying to look at a comprehensive, even though originally when we started this discussion last year, remember we were talking about teacher evaluation and that tool specifically. I think this has opened up the door to look at a more comprehensive system.
So as I shared on the previous slides of how the alignment between the roles and responsibilities of the deputy superintendent position, as well as the strategic plan goals, these are the actual specific domains that I was referring to. So there are 6 domains. The first domain that the deputy superintendent would receive feedback would be the that there is a data-driven focus to support student achievement. And then under each domain, there are elements that are looked for, and those elements are evaluated based on evidence, and a score is given. And I'll explain that a little bit more in the presentation of what that looks like. The second domain is continuous support of improvement of instruction. Domain 3 is continuous support of a guaranteed and viable curriculum. The fourth domain is a community of care and collaboration. Domain 5 is district core values, and the final domain is resource allocation and management. So as you can see, each of those domains are very tightly aligned with the roles, which are student achievement, assessment, curriculum, and professional development in the deputy superintendent role, as well as aligned to the goals of the district that the deputy is to support. As I stated, each domain has elements. This is an example of one of the elements. It's just a snapshot. I do have the full instrument. I made copies for all of you to provide to you so you can take a look at it. But I did want to just pull one snapshot out and explain. So each domain has so many elements. So the first domain is a data-driven focus on support of student achievement. There's always a focus statement of what the leader should be doing. And as a result, there is a desired effect that you should be looking for. If the leader is doing those actions, then there should be a desired effect that you're looking for as evidence. And that evidence is what you use to use the scale as far as indicating that the leadership skills are at the innovating level, applying level, developing level, beginning level, or not using level. In addition to, this is what's called a protocol. So in addition to the protocol also provides evidence, examples of evidence, excuse me. So when you're looking at that focus statement of what the leader should be doing to accomplish that goal area, there's evidences that are that desired effect, that you're achieving what you hope for by what the leader is acting upon, which is one of those 21 behaviors. And so these are examples of evidences that you would look for. Each of the protocols for each element have these examples, and Superintendent Gunning was speaking to the eye observation, which is part of the subscription. The eye observation program provides these protocols digitally to be able to provide feedback, as well as a full library of resources that provide both additional training and support to help the leader grow. The timeline, of course, the approval, if given tonight, purchase order, about 30 days to schedule the training that Superintendent Gunning and I will participate in, and then using that model throughout the year for continuous feedback, as well as a benchmark and final assessment. And then, of course, the reflection at the end of the year to take a look at how we liked the instrument, what the benefits were, what the drawbacks, and using that as well with the information we're gathering on other instruments that we're looking at for teacher evaluation in the future. Just some supporting details that I did want to highlight that Superintendent Gunning did mention, that it's a cascading system. So it is a comprehensive system, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to take a look at and allow The opportunity of needing a new evaluation instrument for a new role is an opportunity to pilot something that we may have future interest in. And so a cascading system, what that means is that it trickles throughout the organization, is that it creates that common language for leaders, as well as teachers, as well as your classified staff. There are instruments for every role at the district level, every role at a school, right, in education. And then the creation and evolution of this model does come from extension literature reviews. And it's important to note that Learning Science also updates this research and makes modifications to the model. They just most recently updated the model in 2018 with the most current research. This is the cascading that we were mentioning, kind of give you a visual of what that means. At the top in the purple is the focuses of a district leadership model. In the middle is the principal leadership component. At the bottom, which is the most important part, is the foundation of our school system, which is our teachers. And it just shows you the alignment of how the different feedback and common language is all working together to not only provide evaluation and accountability, but most importantly, growth. And then the last thing I'll leave you with tonight and ask if you have any questions is just this quote right from Marzano and Toth, just says, student learning is not influenced by teacher effectiveness alone, rather a chain of influence beginning with the effective district evaluation system, which influences the quality of the district, schools, and teacher leaders. So that's why we're bringing this to you tonight in hopes that we can try the system out to see if in fact it would be a good fit for the future. I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Doozy. I have a couple of questions. I'll start and then I will open it up to the other governing board members for questions. When we adopt a new curriculum, we always look at multiple programs. So I understand that this new position that you're in creates an opportunity for a new evaluation tool for yourself, because we don't have a connected system right now between teacher evaluations up to Superintendent Gunning's evaluation. If you've been watching the board meetings, you've seen us hash out this tool that we use. And I would love to see something comprehensive implemented in the district. But my question goes back to, are there any other systems that we're looking at, especially in tandem potentially, that would fill this need for us?
We actually are looking at several other systems as well, and are looking at comprehensive systems. We're in that beginning stage with those organizations. A common one is under Danielson's program, which I think a lot of people are familiar with Danielson's evaluation system. But since we did not have an evaluation tool yet for Dr. Doozy, that we needed to move forward with some type of tool this year, we thought it was a great opportunity to pilot as one component as we go through the process. So it could very well be that we get to the end and we say this really wasn't a good fit and that we need to come back with a different evaluation system for next year. During this time of this school year, though, we are exploring for the teacher component as well. And so then we'll have other opportunities, I think, to look at. And we may need to say, like, we need to look at other options, or if there's something that we're leaning more towards for the teacher perspective, the alignment will be important. Even if this is an evaluation that maybe we really like for her role, the alignment from top down is very important to me, and having that common language across the organization.
Yeah, agreed. My follow-up question to that is, in this presentation, we saw the cost for this one position evaluation. What is an estimate of the cost to implement this district-wide?
So I will comment if we were to, I know the answer to this part of the question. If we were to use this instrument, we could use it for any amount of district leaders for that cost. So like, let's say this year that we were saying, okay, we're identifying all our district leaders in Litchfield. We'd like to use this instrument for all of them. That cost encompasses, it's two or many. in that cost. As far as the teacher evaluation tool, we're still working with the company as far as getting ideas of a cost. Obviously, it would be much more because you're talking about evaluating many more people and giving access to their tools, their technology tools, which really is what the biggest cost is the actual access to eye observation.
Well, I mean, the reason I asked the question is because I don't see the point in piloting something that might not be feasible for us to even implement. So do we have any idea what that number might look like in order to implement this district-wide?
I can get that for you. I can get at least an idea. But
Okay.
I do not have that
You
for you
don't have
this
that.
evening.
Okay. That makes it challenging to approve this evening, but let me think on that and I'll open up the floor to any other board member questions.
I'll start if that's okay. It sounds to me like the intention, right, is sort of this top-down approach. We're going to pilot the program, and if it is successful and you think it's a good fit, we will open it up to other district leaders and then potentially teachers. I know you're in the beginning and we haven't even piloted the program, but I know you're looking sort of at timeframe. What do you expect in terms of rollout over a period of time? Our teacher evaluations are, complicated. We've tried to hash them out up here, and I'm not even sure we're really the best ones to get down into the nitty gritty, but it sounds like this might be a program that provides that sort of comprehensive understanding from top to bottom. So I guess my concern is that if we're 5 years away from that, then that's probably a little too long. So how quickly could we implement something knowing that we're going to, it's going to take a full year to pilot? What's the sort of life cycle of that?
Absolutely. And there's still work to be done with looking at different vendors. And we've already been meeting with them since I started last 2 months. We've met with different companies. I would like to get a committee together with some teacher representation. So I think we invest this year in spending the time to talk and discuss and look at those programs. And it would be my hope that we would have a new system in place for the teacher evaluation system by next year. I don't know if that's a little too optimistic or not, but I think that it's definitely doable. And I think from the feedback that I've already received from principals, I think they're eager to get an evaluation tool in place that really focuses on teacher growth and creates a common language that's aligned to their professional learning communities. So I think as far as getting buy-in and ownership into making this decision, I don't think we're not talking about 5 years. I'm very optimistic to say in the next year, we may have to stretch it to 2 years, depending on, how long it takes to deliberate over the different programs.
And that seems to be in line with our former discussions on using this year to do just that, is sort of figure out what we need to do and what advancements we need to have. And if there's another vendor or doing it ourselves, what have you, that process, unfortunately we have to evaluate every year. So we have to do them in year chunks, which, makes it a little bit difficult, but that aligns with the timeline I was expecting. Thank you.
I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea of us not knowing the cost yet for the teachers and trying this program out because of a couple of things. One, we want something for our deputy superintendent as soon as possible so that they can start using that. And two, even if we end up getting money, like a number back that's just out of our price range of what we're willing to pay, it still gives us an idea of a program that can have that top bottom, like from the top all the way down, and can see how much we like using something like that. And then we can start looking at other programs that might be more fiscally responsible for us to use if this ends up being not in control. And I think you just became my favorite person when you said that you thought we could do this by next year, because there's a lot of times when I feel like it takes us a really long time to do things. And you just made me so happy that you're like, we're going to get this done. So thank you for that.
I have a question. So the training, the two of you will be trained, correct? And the training will be here. So one of their team members will come here or what?
At this time, they're still conducting their trainings virtually. So it'll be a virtual training.
Virtual training.
Yes, sir.
And how long is the training?
2 to 3 hours of direct instruction and then unlimited coaching opportunity.
And then you want to have a benchmark on November the 23rd. That's excuse me?
I had suggested in January, just because of the timing of beginning this position and selecting the instrument, I felt that the feedback opportunity would be stronger if we waited till I was a little further into the role. And then, of course, at the end of the year. But this instrument also, it allows opportunity for feedback throughout. So you don't have to wait for benchmark or final. You can use any of these protocols, which the protocols are with the elements for each domain. You can use any of these protocols at any time to provide feedback.
And then how soon after the training are you going to talk to the principals and the directors who are going to be, or may not be impacted by this? I mean, other words, what I'm saying, you're running out of time.
Well, this year it would be just for her. So that's why we're going through the training. And we could expose the principals to it, but not necessarily that would be impacting or changing their evaluation system. So they would stay consistent.
This proposal was a little bit confusing as to who, the way I read it, that the deputy superintendent would present this model to the principals, and this is, you're going to engage the principals in this model. Is that what I'm seeing or hearing? No, apparently not.
I think probably what confused, and I apologize for that, is the page where we spoke about who is impacted, meaning that the principals are impacted this year because the leader that's leading your principals is being evaluated and given feedback using this model. So that was my intention, of our intention of sharing that slide. Who is impacted this year would be the principals indirectly from the use of the instrument for the deputy superintendent role. So this instrument would only this year one be for the brand new position of the deputy superintendent. Because currently there's not an instrument for this position.
Okay, so that's an instrument that the superintendent's going to use to evaluate you this year.
Yes.
Yeah, it was very confusing. But okay, I think I've got it now. Thank you.
I do not have any other questions on this instrument, and I can get on board with Board Member Zaidama and her reasoning for me to not be quite so tight about the budget or, potential expenditures going forward, because it's going to be really difficult to evaluate a system for nothing. So I am willing to put some resources and investment into this, because from what I see, if it comes anywhere close to what the impact is, it's going to be well worth the dollars spent, but definitely would like to find out more about it. I'm anxious to potentially get your feedback and hear what you think as you've gone through the training and things like that. So please keep us posted throughout this process. And of course, let us know if you're loving it and it's something that, you potentially want to try to recommend to expand in our district. Any other board member questions or comments?
No, but I move for approval of the evaluation instrument, Deputy Superintendent of Academic Success, as presented.
I second. You still might.
Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Before we get into the next section of our agenda, section 7, the information discussion agenda items that potentially may be lengthy, I would like to take a 2-minute recess. We will return. Thank you. do it. Next on our agenda is item 7A, operational fund balances and reserves discussion. Before I turn the floor over to you, Executive Director Vaughn, I would like to verify if all of the board members had a chance to review this presentation in advance of this meeting.
Yes. I mean, as presented in board docs?
Yes.
Yes, we did.
Yes, I did.
Dr. Dowling, did you have the chance to review this in advance?
Did I have a chance to review all 92,000 slides here?
Yes.
Yeah, Michael and I had a little discussion on Monday about it, but.
Someone's a little feisty tonight, aren't you?
Well, I'm glad to hear that because I also had the chance to review this in advance. So Executive Director Vaughn, I would like for you to please hit the highlights on this, and we will, of course, ask any questions at the end of your presentation. I am very appreciative and thankful for all of the work that you put into all of these. I think it's 44 slides, but since we all have read it in advance, we can hit the highlights and have a discussion.
You'll have to forgive me as I stumble through hitting the highlights a little bit, just because I planned a full presentation of it. But I'll do my best on that. I will start with the typical introduction. Madam President, members of the governing board, Superintendent Gunning, colleagues, and what community is left with us tonight. Thank you for joining me tonight to discuss recommendations for an appropriate level of reserves and fund balance carryover for Litchfield Elementary School District. Just to provide some context to this discussion, this is the first step towards being able to respond to the board request of having multiple forecasts for budgets. So without some agreement on what level of reserves is appropriate, it would be difficult to answer the question of how much additional spending would be appropriate to consider. And so that's why I thought it made sense to present some research and invite some discussion around that area. So just to touch at the high level, I think it makes sense to provide some context on what I mean when I say financial reserves. So financial reserves are fund balances, and they're essentially the organization's emergency fund. They allow the organization to mitigate the impact of negative risks. And they're also evaluated by several different stakeholders. I think it's important to note that if the district has less reserves, it means the district's less prepared to handle risk, and more reserves mean the district is more prepared to handle risk. The reserves can have an impact both on the educational and non-educational side of the district. A good example that we saw of an instance where the district may need to use its emergency fund, if you will, is actually during COVID. And so the federal government provided a significant amount of pandemic relief funds. But had that not been the case, that would have been a great example of a time when the district could tap into its reserves to have a similar impact to what the ESSER funds and other pandemic related funds had. Without those funds, when enrollment declined, we would have had to cut positions. Presumably because of that, the learning loss would have been even greater. So that's one example of a time when without that federal support, which I don't believe we can always rely on being there, we would have needed to tap into those reserves. But I also think it's interesting and important to think about that the fact that there's benefits to the district having reserves, even for those without children in our community. It can have an impact on the tax burden that the district puts towards the community. And let me explain why. In our personal lives, when we need to borrow money, there's credit bureaus who assign credit scores to us. This credit score then impacts who's willing to lend us money and at what interest rate and what costs. A very similar arrangement happens with school districts. Rating companies evaluate the district's financial situation and assign the district a credit rating. This rating then impacts how much interest the district has to pay on its debts. By maintaining adequate reserves, the district can help maintain a good credit rating and get better interest rates when it borrows money. Because the interest the district pays on its bonds are passed directly to taxpayers in our community, the less interest the district pays on its debts, the less taxes taxpayers will be asked to pay. Not only can reserves lower the amount that taxpayers are asked to pay, it can also eliminate some debt that the district would have to borrow entirely. Districts, unlike families, don't receive paychecks every 2 weeks. In fact, for certain types of revenue the district receives, there's significant delays between when the district earns it and when we receive the money. Some districts, to be able to pay bills with that delay, have to enter into short-term borrowing arrangements, and then obviously pay borrowing costs and interest on those borrowings. With adequate reserves, it means we have cash in the bank to cover that timing difference and not have to borrow those funds from the get-go. Now that we've covered some of the reasons why maintaining adequate reserves is important or beneficial, the natural next question is, what's an appropriate or adequate level of reserves? And I think it's important to recognize that that's really a balancing act. There's certainly benefits to having reserves, but there's not much benefit to having more than you need. In our personal lives, we often hear the rule of thumb of 3 to 6 month emergency funds. But what this presentation is meant to look at is, what would that similar rule of thumb be for school districts? We'll cover at a high level 3 different approaches tonight. One of them being industry best practice risk analysis, which one of the reasons this presentation is so long is I provided discussion on each of the areas of risk that model asks organizations to consider. I also looked at the methodologies that rating agencies use to actually rate our credit worthiness, because they do publish those methodologies. And then I also took the opportunity to do a peer district benchmark, looking at districts who have both high credit ratings as well as they're not considered high risk by the Auditor General's office for reserves. Towards the end of the presentation, I look at all of those 3 recommendations side by side to reach what I would recommend be an approach the district could implement going forward. The Governmental Finance Officers Association is the professional organization that publishes that risk-based approach I discussed earlier. You can see on the slide the various risk areas that it discusses. So there's extreme events, revenue stability, expense volatility, leverage, liquidity, how much other funds rely on your operating funds, growth, and capital projects. We'll touch the highlights of these as we go through. We've talked a bit tonight already about the aggregate expenditure limit. That's one of the largest extreme events, extreme negative events that the district could face right now. As you saw tonight, I mean, we already talked about an estimate of the budget cut that would cause. One item that is not always as well understood about the aggregate expenditure limit is it doesn't look at all funds that the district has to offer. And so many of the areas that we hold our reserves are actually exempt from the aggregate expenditure limit. And so in the instance where the aggregate expenditure limit were to not be overridden, the district, if it had adequate reserves, could shift that spending at the end of the year to those areas of the budget that are exempt from the aggregate expenditure limit. So it's another example where our reserves may need to be used. It's also important to just touch on briefly that overrides and bonds, while they provide significant opportunity for communities to provide additional support to their local schools, it does create something like a fiscal cliff. And what I mean by that is if you're in a situation where your override continuation may not be successful, you are then in a situation where you're making budget cuts. Having reserves provides more control over how that cut might look, because even though even though a district would need to cut a certain amount from the M&O budget each year, you could shift some of those costs to a different area of the budget to spread out the amount of time you have to fully cut it from the budget. So as opposed to completely cutting that funding over the 3-year time period that overrides phase down, you may spread that out over 4 or 5 by spending down reserves to do so. The same thing is true of bonds. It's just with bonds, there's not that 3-year phase down. Once you spend the money, it's spent. All right. It's also possible or likely, depending on what research you look at, that we are potentially headed towards a recession. And so I have a slide in here. I'll skip to it. I think this is an interesting slide, in that what it's showing is the base support level, which is the primary driver of M&O funding for school districts. I've shown 2002 to present day, and I've also inflation adjusted it using the Consumer Price Index. And what you can see is what happened to the spending power of the base support level after the 2008-2009 recession. The reason recessions can have such a significant impact on budgets available to K-12 education is that when the state starts seeing budget shortfalls, they need to make budget cuts as well. And a significant amount of their budget is K-12 education. And so when they're looking to balance their budget, it's natural to look at where you're spending the most money. And you can see what happened following the prior large recession. Again, having reserves would allow us to respond to that at a larger timeline than what the immediate cuts might look like. Let me catch up on my notes really quick. We also have a similar fiscal cliff with the ESSER funds. I know this board has talked about that, and it's one of the reasons why we are so focused on the return on investment work with the ESSER funds, because as that phases out and that funding is no longer available, we will need to determine what to keep and what to cut. Again, just like overrides or any other funding shortfall, having reserves allows you to potentially extend those longer rather than cutting immediately. You can have it be a less extreme impact. All right, so now we're moving into the revenue stability section of the risk model. It's important to note that prior to fiscal year 2017, Arizona School District's M&O revenue was calculated using prior year student data. This allowed for greater clarity of the resources that would be available when setting budgets for the year. Starting in 2017, districts have had to forecast and estimate how many students they would serve. If forecasts were off, mid-year budget cuts would be required unless adequate reserves were available to allow the district to continue operating as originally budgeted until the next budget period. This can be particularly significant due to how much of the district's budget is salary and benefits. Without the protection of adequate reserves, significant mid-year cuts would require the district to look at staffing and a potential reduction in force. Our reserves protect us from that. The legislature actually acknowledged the increased risk the current year funding brought to school districts. Prior to 2017, Arizona school districts were limited to a 4% M&O carry forward, which is one of the places districts can and often do save reserves. With current year funding, any statutory limitation on M&O reserves were lifted, and the additional risk brought by current year funding was the primary driver of that change. If you don't mind, I'm just going to skip this slide for time. All right. So we'll move forward to the expenditure volatility area of the risk model. The district faces risks from expenditure volatility. So unlike private businesses, districts are not able to raise prices with increased costs. So the district is particularly vulnerable to inflation. For example, Arizona minimum wage is indexed to inflation without limit, but the inflation adjustment districts receive for M&O revenues are limited to 2%. As a result of the inflation adjustment, Arizona minimum wage is scheduled to go up 8.2% January 1st. This increase will not impact Litchfield this year because the district's minimum wage is already higher than what the minimum wage is scheduled to increase to. However, this will be an ongoing issue for the district. There's also significant areas that the district spends money on where inflation is particularly high. So nationwide, there's expected to be an increase in healthcare costs ranging from 5.6% to 10%. There's also significant inflation in other areas of the district's operation. For example, the cost of construction supplies and materials have increased 58.6% over a short period of time. And we've seen that not only as we work on the White Tanks Learning Center construction, but on other repairs and construction across the district. Leverage is an area where Arizona school districts don't see a lot of risk because it's required that long-term debt that districts enter into be voter approved. And as a result of that arrangement, it's directly supported by secondary property taxes. Just for completion's sake, I didn't want to admit it from the risk analysis. So I'll move forward. Liquidity looks primarily at the need to have appropriate levels of cash to support operations. This can be particularly impactful for school districts because despite the current year funding we discussed earlier, the state does not fully pay their portion of the district's revenue during the school year. This is known as the state aid rollover. For this school year, it's budgeted to be over $800 million of state aid. That money will be withheld from districts until the beginning of next year. For last year, that was $11 million for Litchfield specifically, which is over 25% of the state aid we received. There's also a delay in receiving payments for property taxes levied for current year due to the due dates on the taxes. As an example, property tax payments for this year's operations are not due to the county treasurer until October of 2023 and March of 2024. None of the property taxes meant to support this school year's operations are due prior to this school year concluding. This can cause a liquidity issue if there's significant change in budget capacity from year to year. Due to these delays in revenues, that's where I spoke earlier on many districts will enter into short-term borrowing arrangements, whether that be through the county or to investors. By utilizing cash from reserves, we're able to eliminate the costs of those borrowings, which ultimately maximizes the resources available to students. The next area of risk that the GFOA recommends considering is the extent that revenue shortfalls in other funds or areas of the district budget would need to be addressed by the reserves. One way of looking at this question is the extent at which we operate out of those other reserves. One measure of that would be how many positions are in these funds. State and federal grant funds support over 100 FTE or full-time equivalent positions, and over 200 full-time equivalent positions are supported by other funds. Non-M&O funds support over 22% of the district's workforce. As a result, there's significant opportunity where our reserves may need to support operations outside of M&O. Growth can also increase the need for reserves because it intensifies the difference between the increased need for resources that growth brings and the district receiving cash to support those needs. Capital projects are another area where reserves may need to be tapped. And this is because capital projects, depending on their nature, it's difficult to spread them over many years. They tend to clump up and they tend to be large. Reserves can serve as a way for the district to have resources on hand to respond to capital needs when they arise. You'll recall that the board recently approved a facilities assessment. The result of those sorts of assessments typically come back with a laundry list of projects that the district needs to undertake. The large projects that facility assessment is likely to identify would be part of building the next bond program that the district may request. But any reserves that we choose to use for those projects would ultimately reduce the amount we would have to ask taxpayers to support. So that's another instance where having reserves on hand for those types of projects can directly reduce the tax burden of the district on our community. The other area for capital is equipment refresh. And so I did some analysis to look at how old our equipment is. And 90% of our equipment that had an original purchase price of $5,000 or more, the average portion of their useful life that equipment is at 90%. What that means in layman's terms is, if you will, is that they're effectively at end of life and they'll need to be replaced. And so reserves can be looked at to start replacing those and refreshing them, but also for developing more of a refresh schedule so that hopefully that doesn't grow to be such a concern for the district in the future. I also think it's important to note that the district sees opportunities for security improvements on our campus. Current capital funding Arizona school districts received is not designed to support safety initiatives. Instead, it's designed to support districts meeting the minimum adequacy standards set by the School Facilities Oversight Board. These standards say that a school is adequately safe if it has an enclosed playground. In our current environment, Litchfield would like to provide additional security at our schools. we can use reserves for emergency safety measures, but larger items will ultimately likely need to be supported by a bond initiative. We also have need for a new school based on projected growth in the western and northern parts of the district. Funding from the state is unlikely to be available because the district has capacity in other schools, just not geographically near where the growth is expected to be. We'll ultimately need to go to the voters for bond support of a new school, but certain parts of the new school building could be supported by reserves or capital funding. Ultimately, from the perspective of capital purchases, reserves give the district the flexibility to respond when the need arises and can reduce to a certain extent the bond requests made to the community for larger projects. All right. So we quickly went through all of the risk-based areas that the GFOA suggests organizations look at. And based on the risk factors discussed tonight, the recommendation following the GFOA model would be 26% to 35% of operating revenues. Next, we'll move on to the rating agency benchmarks and peer review. We'll then look at recommendations side by side to come to a recommendation for Litchfield. So again, the rating agencies are very similar to the district's credit bureaus. They do publish their models, and the particular rating agency that rates Litchfield looks for having at least 30% of operating revenue to be eligible for its highest rating. If we move to the peer district methodology, effectively, I identified peer districts not in a way that we typically do because it's not truly related to academics or location. What I did was I looked at the publicly available bond rating reports that school districts have to publish when they have bonds, and I identified Arizona school districts with top bond ratings who also did not have risk factors related to reserves in the Arizona Auditor General's risk review of school districts. You can see on the slide the school districts that ended up having us look at. Briefly, I identified operating revenues effectively as the reoccurring revenue we receive for M&O. Much of what's on the slide there is just the different components of what constitutes reoccurring revenue for M&O. I also looked at revenue to match expenditures and reimbursable state and federal grants, because if you think about our grants like Title I or Title II, those kind of grants we see every year, we do a significant amount of operating out of those grants. And then I also looked at revenues for the funds that I was considering part of the reserve. For how I identified what these school districts' reserves were, I pulled down their annual financial report. At the time I did the analysis, the 2021 was the most recently available. And these really are the primary funds that school districts can use for reserves due to the restrictions on these funds. Not all school districts use all of these funds, but to get a true picture of what each district had available to them, I did look at all of them. All right, so you can see that excluding Tempe Union, there actually is a fairly tight grouping of what these districts had. It ranged from 23% to 32% at Madison. And so if we look at the three different recommendations together, they paint a pretty consistent picture. The GFO recommendation is 26% to 35% based on the risk factors. the rating agencies at 30% and the peer districts, excluding the outlier was 27 to 32%. That's the average to the high end. And if we step back from the percentages just for a second to try to put that into context, what that's really saying is that the recommendation ranges from having a 3-month emergency fund to a little bit over a 4-month emergency fund, which fairly well aligns even with the personal finance recommendation that you typically hear of 3 to 6 months. And so what I would recommend we consider having as our working target as we look at budget recommendations is that we have a target of that 30%, which is towards the middle of all of the recommendations and is the minimum that the rating agencies want to see to have their highest ratings, that we use the 35% that was the high end of the GFOA recommendation as our upper limit, and a lower limit of 26%, which is the lower end of that GFOA recommendation. What I mean by having a target upper limit and lower limit is that if we were to go over that upper limit, that we would take action to spend down the reserve, because there's not much benefit to having more than that. If we were lower than that lower limit, we would take action to build the reserves back up to keep the district well protected, and that target is, what ideally we would like to see. If we look at what Litchfield does have, you can see that we're at 34.2%, which is within the range of the recommendations. And you can see the funds that we particularly hold it in. So M&O and indirect costs certainly have the highest. Then we have Medicaid, Civic Center, gifts and donations, etc. The reason the reserves are where they are is there's certain benefits based on the restrictions of those funds to have it there. So M&O is your least restrictive funding source, and so you can use that for pretty much anything. Indirect cost is very unrestricted as well. And then E-rate, as an example, is limited to technology-based items, your internet, things like that. So it certainly could help some costs that are in M&O, but not to the extent that indirect cost and M&O obviously could. And so that's why you see it's not as evenly distributed. That's a strategic decision that prior administration has made. And then to step back from the percentages again and just talk about how many months of an emergency fund that really means. Litchfield's sitting at a little bit over a 4-month emergency fund. When you're talking about spending down reserves, there are a couple of things that you have to keep in mind. So our reserves are actually analyzed each year, not just by the rating agencies, but also by the Arizona Auditor General's office. And so there's certain triggers that if you meet them, that the Auditor General's office will flag you as high risk. And so in the next slide, I've provided a recommendation that if we were in a situation to spend down reserves, how that might look like, just to keep us not triggering those risk analyses that those of the organizations that watch what we're doing with our reserves become concerned. I provided a similar approach to if we were in a situation where we needed to build back up our reserves. In each case, the goal is to gradually make that change to have in the building back up reserves have as minimal a negative impact as possible on the educational program, because when you're building back up reserves, what that really means is you're intentionally spending less than you're bringing in to build up that balance. This time I'll open it up to any discussion or feedback.
Do any board members have questions or feedback on this very thorough presentation?
I do have a question. On that second to the last slide where you had your recommendation, draw down 5% a year, maximum. So basically, that's a drawdown on the M&O carry forward and the indirect cost monies, basically, right?
So throughout this entire presentation, I'm looking at the reserves as one entity. And so when I say reserves, I'm really saying that full 34%.
Okay.
I also think it's important to note that I provided those recommendations on what a drawdown or build up would look like. I'm not saying I recommend that, because my recommendation is that the upper limit is actually 35%, which we're getting close to, but we are not at.
So it'd be a drawdown 5% a year. So you'd go to 29. If you drew down 5%, you would have 29% in reserve, or 5% of the 34.
I was thinking 5% of the 34.
Okay, not 5 points. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
That-
Thank
that-
you for asking that question.
Yeah. But that doesn't, okay.
And the way I came to that was really looking at what the Auditor General's office looks at as far as 50% or more over 4 years. If you were, you could get close to that if you were doing too much more than 5 percentage points a year. And so I was just trying to keep within their metrics.
Just to clarify, Dr. Dowling, your question, we're at 34.2% right now as it stands for fiscal year 2023. So you are not recommending we participate in that drawdown now. You're saying not until we reach 35%, which would be at least next fiscal year or later, whenever that happens. So that drawdown is theoretical in the sense of we're not doing it right now. So we're not going to 29%. We're going to stay at 34. Is your
That's my
recommendation?
recommendation. Yes.
Is that until we are over 35, we wouldn't even look at that
The
drawdown? chart?
the reason I wanted to provide it as a point of discussion is the board requested different budget scenarios. So as I go out multiple years, I may project that our reserves would increase to that level. And then in my budget forecasts, I would then come back and recommend that we have some additional funding to spend. What laying this out allows me to do with those projections is come back with an actual dollar amount and saying, you know, based on these projections, we might have X dollar amount to spend. Without laying out an approach, I wouldn't be able to do that without simply providing what the reserves look like they would be and then inviting that discussion. What I'm hoping for here is that we can discuss a more systematic approach so that there's less question, right? So that's why I tried to provide the data to drive us towards a more data-driven approach to managing our reserves.
Thank you.
I do have a point I would like to discuss. So Executive Director Vaughn gave us his reasoning for the recommendation, and I understand the reason behind the recommendation. And I am in full support of our target percentage of 30% based on the Moody ratings, which makes total sense to me. I'm also in favor of the lower limit. We would not want to be at any financial risk at any point in time. My point of discussion comes in for our upper limit, the 35%. I feel like that is on the extreme side of conservative. I would like to see 32%, maybe 33%, which would give us some wiggle room to hopefully be able to actively manage and stay above that target of 30%, but not be so conservative that we are beyond where our peers are as well. Do any board members have feedback on that point?
No, I mean, I'm tracking with your line of thinking. I understand what you're saying. Can you put that into a dollar figure, the difference between, let's say, 33 and 35%? I'm talking back of the napkin ballpark, not like exact, but you know, it's difficult when you're looking at percentages when it translates to a specific dollar amount. And so what is the difference just between like those two percentages?
Just to clarify, between 34 or between 35 and what number?
And what did you suggest? 32, 33?
Let's go with 33, just to be
33.
more conservative.
We're talking roughly $1.8 million.
Okay, thank you for that.
So let me then further elaborate on that discussion. $1.8 million that we would potentially put into, I mean, at this point, we're not at 35, but we are above 33. So we would then potentially trigger a spend down to aim to be at 33% maximum in our next budget, which for me aligns with us still maintaining a very conservative approach, yet utilizing every dollar that we can on the students that we have in our district today.
I agree based on the data from the peer districts, the results there, that it still puts us in the upper threshold of peer districts and what, I mean, outside of Tempe Union, which seems to be an outlier, 33 still puts us at the top of that heap of peer districts as well.
I don't like 33. I like 32 better, because one of the things with this financial thing we went to yesterday is it talked about, while it's important to have your reserves and your carry forward, we need to remember that the kids, these taxpayer dollars are coming in this year for these kids. And the larger our carryover is, the more that the tax dollars that are coming in right now are never getting spent on these children that are here right now. So I want us to be fiscally responsible. I also want to make sure that our kids are getting the benefit from the taxpayer dollars as much as they can right now.
Which I agree with. I feel the same way about the tax credit dollars, which are significantly smaller dollars, but no less impactful, that those students and families have given those funds, and the students that are impacted need to be the students that are in our schools today and not saved for some other point down the road. Again, with these amounts that we're talking about today, which are our reserves, we do need to be conservative and we need to have funding available. No doubt about that. I could get behind 32% upper limit. We're not taking any action on this. This is just for discussion. So I'm happy to hear any other discussion points.
Dr. Dowling, what are you thinking?
It's difficult to look at the percentages, and I had the conversation with Michael the other day. I need to see dollars, preferably instead of percentages, to see exactly what we have in relationship to what a drawdown would be if we had to use money. For i.e., we wanted to give a little bit more pay raise, and it was more than the $1.8 million. Let's say it was 2.3, 2.4. I'm having a hard time relating to where the monies are. Obviously, the M&O and the indirect cost monies are the most, and they're about $16-17 million, right? M&O carry forward between the two. Well, yeah, that's what it is. I'll almost guarantee it, because that's where it's been.
Yeah,
So
it's
that's
right
where
around,
it's been.
it's right around there.
Yeah, so that's your biggest impact, other than Medicaid. That's where you're going to get your money. If we want to spend money, and that's a tough one. And the purpose of keeping it up around over 30% is to we get the best rate possible on bonds, right? And that in the bond companies, I'm calling bond companies, security companies, agencies, whatever you call them. They look at you, they look at like this is money in the bank. Okay, that's what we're talking about. And you got a little bit more money to pay down on that mortgage. So you're paying over and above to get the interest, pay less interest. So if you have a 15-year bond, you're looking at paying it down. God, no, with that kind of a reserve.
No, we're not talking about paying it down faster. We're talking about being offered a better interest rate regardless of
You're not
the,
talking about paying it down faster,
no.
not using any part of that money to pay it down.
To put it in more personal finance terms, you're talking about being offered a 2% interest rate mortgage versus a 3.5-4% interest rate mortgage.
Yeah, I understand, the bond ratings. I understand the more money you have in the bank, the better you look. So, but if we're not paying it down faster, I'm not seeing the total benefit.
The total benefit is that the interest rate directly impacts how much we're paying, even if we're not paying it down faster. The amount of the payment goes down, and the taxes associated with a bond are directly levied to cover that payment. And so if the payment is less, the taxes will be less.
And we generally, as a district, have issued our bonds and paid off our bonds in a very steady state so as to not disrupt that tax rate and be consistent for our taxpayers.
What are the next steps after this conversation? If we're kind of talking here and we come to some general consensus that we'd like to see it in this area, what are your next steps from here with us?
So my next steps, and I'm already working on them, but I will be projecting revenues for the district over a certain number of year period, and projecting expenses with some variables, like certain types of inflation and what raises we may consider giving, just to try to have a somewhat realistic view of what the budget may look like in those years. And as part of that, I will calculate what the reserves would look like in that environment. By hearing from the board that we want to be at 33%, what that'll allow me to do as we look at the different scenarios is look at the reserve we have and be able to evaluate and report back if in those scenarios we would have more money to spend. Because the scenarios that we're talking about looking at is if the AEL is not overridden, if the override is not passed. That those analysis will also look at the fiscal cliff related to the ESSER funding going away and us having to decide what happens to the interventions that we've put in place. We've already seen in certain instances such as the tutoring intervention, that we're having a great deal of success with it. Another great intervention that we've put into place that we may very well want to think about continuing is the very much expanded summer school. And so historically, summer school, just to continue down that example, was primarily at Title I schools because Title I funding would be utilized to support the summer school program. Our summer school spending when we expanded it was $500,000. That's significantly more than our entire Title I grant. And so as we look at potentially continuing these programs, that will put a strain on our recurring revenue sources. And so, as I talked earlier, one option we have is to draw down reserves to continue those programs until we can make a more informed decision on what to cut to make room for them. But until we reach some level of consensus on what we want our reserves to be, it's hard to report back if we have enough or not.
Yep.
Does that make
Understand.
sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that explanation. I would just like to say I appreciate the systematic approach to this and using sort of data-driven strategies to determine what we want before we get in a situation where the crisis is on us and we have to make some very difficult decisions and we don't have the guide rail or the guardrails in place to tell us what our original vision was for that. So I appreciate the foresight. And I think we're probably should have been having these conversations earlier, but I think now is a good time because we do have some potential revenue disruptions coming our way that we may not know the answers to those for several months. So I know we need to round up this conversation, but I would reiterate my support for, a reduction of that, only the upper limit to a 33% and using that as a guide rail. That still puts us at the top of the heap of our peer districts. It is not significantly different than the recommendation on the table. And I think still puts us in a very stable position to, continue to meet the requirements for our bond providers and things like that. So.
Well, and the AEL, but that's part of the reason to have this conversation a little bit early. Perfect.
Yeah, I do want to comment to that because I think that I don't know, that may be a little counterintuitive to the whole purpose of this is because I think despite the revenue disruptions, what we're saying here is that this is what we need to have in order to meet expectations. So even if the override doesn't pass and it's not successful, having this conversation now shouldn't change that we're not going to go down to 15 or 20% in 20 days because it doesn't pass. I mean, I think that we still have an obligation to be financially sound despite that. And it's going to mean some harsh cuts for sure. But I'm not sure that I'm in agreement that we can then just go in and change and modify what we think is best because some of our revenue streams have become unstable. I think that's the whole purpose of this conversation to say, despite those changes, this is what we think is best. And we're going to have to make some difficult choices to maintain long-term stability versus short-term coverage until we can figure out how that sunset will affect us.
And so that's really the point of the lower limit, And so in a situation where you're really in a bad spot, you would want to do what you could to remain in that lower limit. There could be significant circumstances where we would choose to dip slightly below that very intentionally with a plan then to rebuild. The AEL being a particular example of that, because with that level of budget cut that deep into the fiscal year, it would be very difficult to do anything but simply use your reserves to finish out the year. Districts without those adequate reserves very well may have to consider shutting down. We would not be in that situation because of our reserve levels. But that's just an example of an instance where I could see us very reasonably deciding, no, it makes more sense to remain operational than
Sure.
keep a hard line at 26%.
Agreed. Good point. Yeah, I think to expound a little bit on Board Member Clymer's point, the AEL, as you alluded to, Executive Director Vaughn, is a current year cut. So we've already budgeted, we have people under contract, we have people that we are obligated to pay this year. The override is a different issue in that if the override does not pass, that is a phased down funding approach, and we will have the opportunity in the spring to make cuts to our budget in the fall. And we will have to be forced, we will be forced to do that, because I don't believe this board is going to want to drain our reserves to maintain current operations. And that goes against what the voters are asking for if the override doesn't pass. So we will need to implement cuts, and we will need to continue to reserve the adequate reserves. And again, that's the point of having this discussion in advance of those, so that we are not being reactive to those cuts, AEL being an exception, but we are being proactive in our board policies and practices and sticking by those regardless of some of the other circumstances that might come about. I think we've exhausted that conversation for this evening. So again, thank you, Executive Director Vaughn, for all this information on the fund balances. And I hope this provides you with some additional direction going forward for your next step in this process.
Thank you so much for entertaining the discussion.
Anytime. I would like to make a suggestion on items 7B and 7C. We have a study session scheduled for 1 week from tonight that I would like to move these items to be discussed during that study session, if that is okay with my fellow board members and with Superintendent Gunning, based on the time of the evening tonight. Is that reasonable?
Yes. I'm okay with that.
Superintendent Gunning, are you okay with that? Okay, I would like to retain the items that we're doing first reads on, because those items are things that we could go ahead and do the first read on so that we can implement those policies in a timely manner. So I would like to then just reiterate, we're going to discuss item 7B and 7C at our study session next week, since those are information and discussion only. And we will move on to agenda item 7D, the first reading and discussion of revisions to the governing board policy revisions DIA, accounting responsibility, and JF student admissions, which will be presented by our favorite person tonight, Executive Director Vaughn.
All right, so let's see. Are they in any particular order? No. All right, so board policy DJ or DIJ is related to a program that Litchfield Elementary School District does not actually take part in, but it's recommended that we update our policy to reflect changes in statute. if you ever want to discuss what this program looks like, I'd be more than happy to discuss it in depth with you. Because at my prior district, we were a part of the program, but effectively what it looks like is as opposed to relying on Maricopa County for a lot of the administrative support that the district does get to rely on the county for, the district is responsible for hiring additional staff to be able to take on those duties. So that's really what that policy is. Again, it's just driven by a legislative change. Policy JF is on student admissions, specifically related to certificates of educational convenience. This is a very infrequently used program that is available to families who are precluded by distance, lack of adequate transportation facilities, or the pupils' parents' employment from attending their school that they in the area that they reside in. They can request a certificate of educational convenience. Just like the other policy revision, this change is being driven by a legislative update.
Do any board members have questions or comments on the first read of policy revisions to DIA or JF?
I just have one sort of logical question about the student admissions. I'm not sure I understand. So if a student applies to our district because one of our schools is closer to them than their home school?
So this is why it's such a infrequently used provision in the law. It's primarily used in incredibly rural areas. And in fact, when I started asking questions to the district's attorney on it, they were confused why I was asking, because they basically said we shouldn't see much of it at all.
Okay.
But yes, it is confusing
Okay.
for that reason, because it really shouldn't happen.
Right. That doesn't make logical sense. Okay. Understood. Thank you.
All right, if there are no further questions or comments, we will move on to agenda item 7E, the first reading and discussion of revisions to governing board policies, JRR, student surveys, KI, visitors to schools, and KB, parental involvement in education. And this will be presented by Superintendent Gunning.
Madam President, members of the governing board, I will touch on some highlights of these. For JRR for student surveys, it's still related to the 14 specific topics in the guidelines that have already been previously placed in those guidelines. If we were to have a survey of hitting any of those 14 items, we must provide a copy to the parents at least 7 days in advance and receive permission to do so. At this time, we currently do not have a survey that hits that, but we would have, put those provisions in place if we were to do so. For KI, for visitors in schools, it's just expanding a little bit more on our visits and tours of our campuses and observations. And this has to be available for parents who currently have students and also parents who are anticipating enrolling their children. Which is something we already actually do, but it's just now in policy. For KB, parental involvement in education, it creates procedures enabling parents to request access to school district and employee electronic records that relate to their child. So expanding that component, it does list exactly what types of records a parent may request. It enables parents also to bring a lawsuit and seek damages and other remedies if their rights are violated. There's another component of this policy in regards to library collections and available books and materials. We are currently exempt from that component because we do not have a media specialist in every library, but it's included in there in case ever such time were to come that we were to have one.
Do any board members have questions on these policy revisions? I will speak for myself and say that I am glad that I attended the ASBA law conference. They reviewed all of the legislative changes as well as policy changes, how that trickles down during that conference, and was well worth the time and energy expended to learn about this in advance and have an increased understanding of these policies and why these revisions are being proposed. Again, this is a first reading and discussion. If there are no questions on these particular policy revisions, we move on to the next section, which is agenda item 7F, the first reading and discussion of revisions to governing board policy EE, transportation services, and EEAEA, bus driver requirements, training and responsibilities, and JICFA, hazing. This will be presented by Executive Director Duplain.
Thank you, President Moran, members of the board. This is a first read on policy EE. The first one is out of SB 1246, which enables school district to contract for vehicles, specifically electric school buses or other electric vehicle services. The legislator's intent of SB 1246 was made clear. It is economical to have electric transportation, prevents pollution, and protects the health of our most vulnerable communities, and the benefits outweigh the costs. The second policy is EEAEA, which is bus driver requirements. With the expansion of SB 1630, additional allowable vehicles that allowed us to have different vehicles came legislative changes to correspond with that, which really stipulates the bus endorsement, and that if we use vans that are 11 to 15 passenger vans, there are different requirements right now. I talked extensively with the trust, Stephanie Yarbo, and she said guidance will be coming out from the trust next week in regards to these. The final one is policy JICFA on hazing, and under HB 2322 criminalized, that House bill criminalized hazing. And because of that, the language was changed to directly reflect the definition of hazing that is in the criminal statute.
Any board member questions or comments on these policy revisions?
In policy EEAEA with the insurance requirements, what types of vehicles do we as a district currently have that are non-bus that transport students?
Currently, we have white fleet, but we are not utilizing those right now to transport our students. What they are working out right now is that this policy expands the board's authority to utilize non-school buses that transport 11 to 15 students. We have not done that thus yet. This mostly includes, as Stephanie talked about, was the smallest special needs buses, and then the white activity buses that are frequently used in high schools. So those are the things. But currently, we do not have any vehicles that fit this description.
Okay, but it does open the opportunity that if in the future we needed to, we could.
That's right.
Okay, thank you for the explanation.
If there are no other questions, we will move on to agenda item 7G. This is a long one. First reading and discussion of revisions to governing board policy GBGCB, staff health and safety, IHA, basic instructional program, IHAMB, family life education, IJL, library material selection and adoption, IJNC, resource centers, media centers, school libraries, IMB, teaching about controversial sensitive issues, IMD, school ceremonies and observances, JLCB, immunizations of students, and JLCC, communicable infectious diseases. This section will be presented by Executive Director DeCoste.
Thank you. Starting with GBGCB, which is a prohibition on the COVID-19 vaccination or mask or face coverings. So basically saying that schools cannot require COVID vaccinations or require face coverings. Should I stop after each one for questions or? Nope, keep going. Okay. Are you sure? Okay, sorry, Megan. IHA on basic instructional programming is having the 9/11 day, which starts technically next September, but because it went into effect on September 24th this year, but we did go ahead and observe it this year in the district, and that was fine. IHAMB, Family Life Education. So that is not allowing students to, not referring students to or using any sexually explicit material in any manner except as approved by you, the governing board, for a sex education program, which we do not currently have and are still looking for options. In November, they'll come to you to talk about a possible science adoption. And so we're looking to see if there's anything that's woven into a science curriculum that we could use for health education. Side note. IJL, selection of library materials and adoption. Superintendent Gunning mentioned that we are exempt from these because we do not have a full-time librarian at any of our schools, but there are some things in here that we are able to do. So, allowing parents to have a list of all the books that their child has checked out. Our Destiny system is easy to do. And we've already talked to principals that even though we're exempt from this, we would still like to provide good customer service to our families and allow them to see what their kids are checking out. So that's something we could easily do. And also conveniently, our library is linked on our webpage, so parents can go to the school and go to their library and click on that and see what books are in their school library. So even though we're exempt, we still have some awesome resources available for our families. And that took us through IJNC. Let me turn my page here. Okay, so IMB is teaching about controversial sensitive issues, which basically just changed 2 words in the policy from the teacher has great responsibility instead of influence, and in the formation of the education of students, not the values of students, that those are the rights of the parents. So they're very minor changes. School ceremonies and observances is the 1-minute moment of silence, not more than 2, and the teacher can't direct any student on what to do with that one. And then it also gives some specifics about what teachers are allowed to read or post in their rooms. And then JLCB, immunization of students, goes very specifically through the immunization records of students having to have those before they begin attendance, although they can start. And our nurses are very diligent about following these guidelines and send the first letter and the second letter and the third letter and talking to parents, and then principals get involved at the second or third, and they call parents to get immunizations in. And then we have the regulation for that one, which gives a description of the different kinds of shots. And again, they mentioned that you can't require COVID-19 vaccinations in that. There's also talk in there about the superintendent submitting the immunization reports to the Department of Health Services by November 15th for the annual report, which our nurses are in the process of doing. And then the lead nurse collects those reports and submits them to me. So we review those. And then for your reference, there's an exhibit, JLBE exhibit for, it's an updated guide of immunizations for students required for school entry. It's in a really nice chart format. I do like how they updated this one. So it's easy to read for everyone. And then JLCC is communicable and infectious diseases. So again, not requiring a face mask or face covering is included in that one. And that's all I have.
I have one just note for clarification. So please correct me if I'm wrong, Executive Director DeCoste, but similar to the 9/11 observance day for policy IMD, the school ceremonies and observances, even though this is not officially our policy to have the 1-minute moment of reflection, my understanding is that we have been doing that since the start of the school year, or at a minimum since the law went into effect on September 24th. Is that correct?
Yes, we have been doing it since the start of the school year. That was part of our pre-training with principals before we came back to school.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for the verification. Any questions on this policy revision section?
I don't have a question, but I do appreciate that we tried to get these enacted from the beginning of the school year because we knew they were coming. As a mom of kindergartner and a fifth grader, both my kids came home talking about what they learned about 9/11. Although I hope that our teachers will be able to work together in the future, because I do know, like, my kindergarten teacher talked about how she spent hours watching videos trying to find the most appropriate video to show to little kinders about 9/11. So I'm hoping, and I know that there's resources from the Arizona Department of Education too, but just if we can have that material for them, because as they get littler, it gets a lot harder to talk about that at an age appropriate level.
It is true. And our curriculum department did send out resources for all of our teachers before 9/11, setting the date since it was on the weekend and sending resources for all grade levels with a link to ADE, which is, they're still beefing up their stuff, but thank you for that feedback.
Excellent. Thank you. We will now move on to the reports section of our agenda, and we will begin with the report from Superintendent Gunning.
Madam President, members of the governing board, I'll keep this short and sweet. Exciting news. We have 2 A+ visits coming our way, one for Rancho Santa Fe and one for Brado Elementary School. So super excited about that. There are more recognitions to come, but I am made to stay silent, so you won't hear that until November. And also we'll be very excited to celebrate our letter grades, which will be coming out at the beginning of November. We conducted apple pie walkthroughs at Dreaming Summit and Western Sky since our last regular meeting. And I was a part of creating and running a professional development for the Arizona Educators of Superintendents Consortium, which is called GuppyMech, as I am the vice chair this year. And so we did our fall symposium on 9/22 and 23.
Thank you, Superintendent Gunning. We will now move on to reports from governing board members. I will start with the far side of the table. Board Member Clymer.
Sure. I did my best to pare this down, knowing this was going to be a long meeting. So I tried to pick the top 3 things that I did in the last, I was going to say week, in the last month, to share with everyone that I was excited to have participated in, although I think we've participated in more in just the last 24 hours than we have in the last week or so. First was the Western Sky Middle School tour, the showcase tour. First and foremost, I know how difficult it is to take that many administrators and teachers and everything sort of off the floor, if you will, and tour us around. But even after being in every school multiple years in my tenure as a board member, I learn something new every time I go, and I meet a new teacher or a new administrator or a new student advisor. And one thing I want to highlight in this tour specifically that was just beyond impressive was the student ambassadors that were selected. What an impressive group of young people. I mean, they were officers or people that were in clubs, officers of student council and builders club and different clubs on campus, folks that were on, yearbook or did art. I mean, they had such a wide selection of students, and they were all given leeway to ask questions and provide information from their perspective, and even give us some really great ideas about food service. So I hope Chef Ron was listening. But anyway, it gives me hope that there are still ways that we are, as a board, can still connect directly with students. We don't really get that opportunity very often. So anyway, my cup was definitely overflowing that day. So thank you for that opportunity. One other thing I want to highlight for that school was we had a great conversation with their admin about all of the work that they are doing with our PLCs. It seems like they've been working really hard, at least this year, and it sounds like from the summer, to invest not only some of their school resources, but their talented staff to really improve that process, get down in the weeds in the data, and cross communicating with teams and grades and all of that. So really impressive work that they're doing in that. So thank you for that opportunity to learn more about it. The second was I attended a webinar on board evaluation, superintendent evaluation. I don't think we want to hear that word for like at least another 6 months. We've been doing that. It seems like so much over the last couple of months and weeks. But it just reminded me again, I know this board has been a part of a board evaluation process in the past, and it just reminded me how, we can best assess our own work. We like to hold others accountable and make sure that everything else is running effectively. But I think, we also need to stop and assess our own ability to work together, to communicate, to provide the guidance that the district needs. And so I hope that we can work together to make adjustments for greater effectiveness and efficiency here. So very good reminder. Last thing was I was not in attendance, but I watched online the Agua Fria Union High School District, their State of the District presentation. And while it's not part of our district here, and I wasn't necessarily attending as a board member, just more as a parent in the district and also a community member, we are a feeder school for that district. And it's just really, I was really proud of a lot of the accomplishments that they have, that they were able to share with the community. And, it's really nice to know that we have such a great working relationship between the districts. We share not only employees across the thing, but, we have a governing board member and lots of relationships back and forth with that district. And so I'm happy to see that when our students leave here, they are going to an equally impressive academic institution like Agua Fria. So anyway, if people haven't watched it, please go and do that. They put a lot of work into their strategic planning, and with their new superintendent coming on board, they had a lot of transition this last year, and it sounds like they are really having a lot of success in that. So I would encourage everybody to be a part of that and to go back and watch it if you can. I said 3 things, only one more thing. Ballots are in your mailbox. Please do your civic duty and vote. I don't care what you vote for, but please do your civic duty and vote. Thank you.
Board Member Zaidama.
I actually did have quite a lot of things to say, and I left my notes at home, and maybe that was like my psychic vision that I didn't want to give that whole big speech tonight. So I did write down notes though, while we had our little break between the 2 things. Some things I was able to do. We did a lot. This was a very busy month, and especially the last 2 days. But a big highlight for me definitely was the Western Sky tour with those students. They impressed me so much. They had no problems telling us how they saw it, why they saw it that way, telling us what they liked and didn't like. They were not intimidated by these grownups that they don't know any way, shape, or form. I was super impressed. I am a big supporter of learning to advocate from a young age. My kids hear that from me all the time at home, that they're going to be their best advocate for themselves. And these kids totally knocked it out of the park. There was 2 kids that just totally blew me away. And I can't even say enough about how amazing these kids were. And I am very impressed with the way that they felt comfortable, and their principal made them feel comfortable to be able to talk to us and to say what they thought and not be afraid of what that would mean. So I was very proud of them. And I too was also impressed with the discussion we had about the PLC process there. And the biggest thing was because the principal talked about how we were not necessarily doing this well. We are getting better. And I am a big supporter of owning up where we're not doing things right and how can we do better, and we want to get better. So what I liked seeing was that they saw that there was an area where they needed to improve, and now they are working as hard as they can to get there. And so I loved seeing that, and I appreciated them talking to us about that. That's what I like about doing our school tours, is I like all that information we get. And I know that some people think maybe it's just this pomp and circumstance, but it's not. We get a lot of real information, and we get to have these real deep conversations with principals. And so I hope that we get to have that at every campus. I'm excited. I was a little sad that our one got canceled today, even though today was a very busy day. I also attended our special meeting we had last month, right? Where we talked about the financial report and the superintendent instrument contract release process. I'm excited to see those conversations moving forward and seeing where we go from there with that discussion. We also had an executive session with Superintendent Gunning at that point. I myself usually like to just chat with Superintendent Gunning whenever things come up, because I'm really not great about just scheduling one-on-one conversations, but I did have a lot of things on my list this last time. So it was nice. I went into the office and met with her, and it was supposed to be like an hour, and it was really like an hour and a half, almost 2. But I appreciate that you answered all my questions, and you were very much just ready to deal with whatever I threw at you, because they were all over the place. I also got to attend yesterday. I got to go to a finance training with Superintendent Gunning and Dr. Doozy, which was awesome because Dr. Doozy's new here with us and we haven't had a lot of time to really get to know her. So I was kind of excited to get to have a whole day to spend time with her. And I felt the training was fantastic. I learned a lot of things. They made it very simple for us to understand. They didn't talk over our heads. And so some of the things that were in our report tonight, I was like, hey, those are budgets that they talked about yesterday. So I totally had a better understanding today. It made me feel a lot better. And then we had an executive session last night. And then today I was able to attend the governing board candidate forum. I think we were all here for that. And now we're meeting tonight. That's my governing board stuff. But the best thing I got to do this last month was that I got to volunteer in both of my kids' schools a ton. I got to help at a book fair. And that filled my bucket so much because I got to help with little kids and helping them get books. And we had a little boy that came in and he was so sad because he didn't have any money and he never can buy any books. And he was like, I can never buy anything. And this is so sad. And everything costs so much money. And I was able to walk him around and show him like some of the special price books. And he was able to get 2 books and 2 of the little like junky item things that I hate kids buying, but they love it, right? He was able to get 2 books and 2 of those items with his little $7 he had. And when he was leaving, he was so happy. And he's like, today is the best day of my life. I got to get everything I wanted. And he gave me like 5 hugs. And I was like, this right here, this is why we're here. And this is what we do all this stuff for, is for these kids. So anytime I'm feeling like the weight of the world is on our shoulders at moments and people are tearing us down everywhere, I just remember that those kids are why we're here. So it filled my bucket a lot, but I was also able to help in doing a Harry Potter celebration in one of my kids' classes. Another at Rancho Santa Fe, they had a big fundraiser. And at the end of it, I love it that they had this bash on the ranch day where kids during their specials got to go and play on all these different bounties and all the special teachers were out there and it didn't interfere with their learning. It was just fun for the kids and it made that day special for them. What was really cool about that day was that their principal left. And so when we have principals not there for whatever reason, we send in people from our admin team to go and fill in. And so I got to have a chat with 2 different admin people there. And it was really great because I just got to talk to different people in the district and kind of get some different perspectives of things and have them see our campus. And I think Rancho Santa Fe is amazing. I'm so happy that we're there with my daughter. And I was super excited to be one of the first people to find out that they were going to get their A+ visit. And then she's like, but I'm not telling anybody, which was really hard to do. So I had to tell Jody, please make sure to tell people they're not supposed to tell anybody when she like emailed the board letting us know. I was worried that like you have a family member that works there and somehow you might be like, oh, this is so great. And then be like, what? So I'm glad that we were able to keep their secret and she was able to do her big hurrah about it this week. And also just this is to let parents know we have volunteers. Volunteers are welcome back on campuses. So reach out to your schools, talk to your teachers, find out ways to get in the classroom because schools cannot do it alone. We need these parents coming in and helping us. We need community members coming in and helping us. So if you are inclined to do that, then please, please, please reach out to our schools and find ways to get in and help. We also have field trips coming back, which is super exciting. This is a sign that we are starting to get back to our normalcy for our kids. And lastly, on my notes also was I voted. I got my ballot, I filled it out and I sent it in the mail because I don't want to forget to get it done. So I encourage everybody. It's one of the best ways to use our voice in this country. And I am proud of us that we get to do it. So please mark your ballots and get them in the mail, or else if you're not on the voter list, make sure not to forget in November, but vote, vote, vote. That's the best thing I can tell anybody to do. That's all I got.
Dr. Dowling.
Thank you. It seems like I've been talking all night, been here 5 hours. It's all right. I was thinking about, well, I've been out to take what Melissa just mentioned. It was, as I'm out and about, and I've been talking to various groups in the last month or so, 2 months, 3 months, and a lot of people want to help. Retired people, like I mentioned earlier, retired educators, engineers, people that want to help. And what I don't know is specifically what to tell them, who to contact, how do they get involved in the schools? Do they go directly to the schools? And that's probably on me for not totally understanding that. I'd like to have a discussion with start with the superintendent and just let me know what to tell them, where to direct them, because these are sincere people I've met. And I want to get them involved because we're all in this thing together, as we talked about. And we're going to need all the community, everybody involved to get us to where, that where we need to be as we make this comeback from the pandemic and the learning loss that our kids have experienced. Also, I appreciate the conversations I'm able to have with Michael over here about finance and things like that. And I appreciate, taking the time to call me back and then playing phone tag while I was at Crazy Chicken having lunch and El Polo Loco, this inside joke, Crazy Chicken. But I appreciate everything that the school district does, what your administration does and is doing so much that it's just one big effort, and we can get there. We can all get there, just giving each other the time and support. I'm talking each other the time and support. Each other, people all in this room that were in this room. And I appreciate the turnout that was here tonight. People took time off from their, whatever they were doing. Teachers were here, parents were here concerned, and they are involved in this school district. And I really appreciated everybody that was here earlier. And with that, I'm going to say, I'm signing off. I've had enough talking, enough questions. If I'll leave the rest to.
Thank you. For my board report tonight, I had 6 items I wanted to touch on, but I'm going to cull it down to 1. October is National Principals Month. So I'd like to specifically recognize our exceptional team of campus leaders. Thank you for the care you show your staff, families, and students. Thank you for the time and effort you put into making your school the best it can be. I'm truly grateful for your continued commitment to public education and the betterment of Litchfield Elementary School District. I'll close my report with lyrics from Starship's classic, "Nothing's Gonna Stop Us." And we can build this dream together, standing strong forever. Nothing's gonna stop us now.
I motion to adjourn.
I will second that.
Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
We
This
can't
meeting-
adjourn until 10 o'clock.
This meeting is now adjourned.
I've got a